Hello everyone. Today we're going to start a series on economic concepts. The idea here is that there are all sorts of different concepts which economists use to describe what's going on. So in order to really talk about economic ideas, we want to make sure we know what those are. Now the first concept we want to think about is what is a good or service. You see here, understanding goods and services. And to take us through that will be Gulnara. So I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Let's get this underway. Here we have a buyer of goods and services, Mr. Mouse. He is come into some money and is trying to consider the types of goods and services he can buy. In this video, we will help Mr. Mouse out by explaining what is the difference between goods and services, the idea of goods lasting through time, and the characteristics of goods that are private and those that are public. Let's go. What do we really mean when we call things goods or call things services? Before answering this, I want to think about why Mr. Mouse is buying things. Mr. Mouse has his dollar coin and he's interested in buying things that give him joy, or at least things that will help him meet the necessities of life. Being fed, being housed, having entertainment, these all are outcomes that Mr. Mouse values, and he's looking at purchasing these outcomes. We may think that a good is a tangible physical thing that provides this outcome, like an apple. A service is then when another person sacrifices time to provide this outcome, like a haircut. Here is a picture of Matt trying to give me a haircut, something that I would never allow in real life. Although these are examples, they aren't quite right. An apple is a tangible good because it's something you can purchase and then have the ability to resell. A haircut is a service as once it's purchased and delivered, it cannot be sold. However, what about going to a restaurant to buy a cooked apple that must be consumed on premises? There you are paying for a service. And what about buying a voucher for a future haircut? There you are buying a good. Although note that often this would be redefined as money instead, a topic for another time. The resaleability of the thing you are purchasing is what defines the difference between a good and a service, and the ability to gain consumption value from something by using it implies that many things we think of as goods turn into services in some way. So a good is a product that has the ability to provide consumption value and can be resold, while a service is something that provides consumption value but cannot be resold. How much further can we take these ideas? I don't know about you, but when I start eating an apple, I eat it all at once. As a result, there is a timing difference between when I buy the apple and when I eat it. But this all happens in quite a small period of time. Why? Because if I didn't eat it fairly quickly, it would rot at the bottom of my fridge. This apple is what we term a non-durable good. A durable good is a good that lasts for a duration of time. A common characteristics of such goods are that they are not all used up when they are put in use. So a durable good is said to provide a stream of services over the time it's used. An example of a durable good would be a washing machine. When we purchase a washing machine, we can use it to wash our clothes multiple times. Each time we get the benefit of clean clothes. Eventually, the washing machine will stop working. Even before that time, it will stop washing clothes as well as it did when you first purchased it. So, as it gets older and the more often it gets used, the less valuable the washing machine is due to the reduction in the value of future users. A used durable good can be resold, but it is not the same product as the new good due to this use. As a result, the prior use of the durable good reduces its resale value. Now that we have thought about Mr. Mouse's demand for buying different goods and services, how do we consider his ability to access these products and whether a market could be established? To think about this, Matt will discuss some different types of goods. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Gulnara. Now, Mr. Mouse gave us a really useful way to think about things he would want to buy, but we want to go a sort of step deeper. We want to think about specific characteristics of goods, so we're looking at goods, and how a market may be developed. How do these refer to property rights? So I'm going to put through a little framework, which comes from way back in the day, that helps us split up types of goods. And when you're off at home, why don't you try to figure out different goods and services you buy that might fit into different categories here. So as we discussed earlier, the distinction between goods and services comes down to their ability to be resold and what is provided. Okay, for example, the provision of hair clippers is a good, but cutting someone's hair is a service for them. What happens when we sell the hair clippers to someone? Well, the individuals who had the hair clippers had legal ownership over them. They had a property right over those clippers. There was a transaction that transferred the ownership of this right to their new owner. Mr. Mouse, as a buyer, may have used his $1 coin to get himself a pair of clippers and thereby can provide himself the service, the enjoyment of haircuts. So say that we know that these hair clippers can only be used for a single haircut. In this case, the seller has transferred the right to a single haircut to Mr. Mouse. What does this sale mean? Well, the clippers can now be used by Mr. Mouse and cannot be used by the seller anymore. And furthermore, they can't be used by any other person. This means that we term the good excludable. When Mr. Mouse uses the clippers, they cannot be used by anyone else at the same time that he's using them. Okay, so when we think about a good, we're thinking about the specific time period it's being used in. Now, therefore, this type of good is termed rival. When a good is both excludable and rival, we call it a private good. This is the typical type of good that we discuss when we talk about scarce products and markets in economics, but it's far from the only type of good we think about. The reason it's the one we talk about is because a lot of markets we observe and a lot of goods that are traded, merchandise trade that occurs, follow this type of framework. And so we will think about allocation of goods with markets in this type of way. This excludability and the such define how the market is set up. But how about when we start introducing other things into it? Okay. So the excludability gave the property rights. The rivalry implied that other people couldn't use it. But what happens if this good becomes durable? So instead of having a single use, it can be used multiple times. Do we no longer have a private good? Well, not quite. The hair clippers, even though they don't disappear after Mr. Mouse uses them, they do lose some of their value. They become less useful for a future haircut. This is called depreciation. Because the hair clippers depreciate, that is some use of those hair clippers, and they constitute the service and the cost for getting that service for the owner of the hair clippers, Mr. Mouse. As a result, the hair clippers remain a private good, and the amount of use that occurs is that depreciation. What happens if hair clippers don't depreciate? Well, if they can still only be used by one person at that point in time, and Mr. Mouse has the property rights over their use, it is still a private good. He has that hair clipper. He determines who uses it and when, and while he's using it, other people can't. As a result, it's both excludable and rival and remains a private good. Now let's go crazy. What happens if this is a wild hair clipper machine that can cut 10,000 mouse's hairs at the same time, and when it is cutting, it does not depreciate in value? Well, in this case, the hair clippers would be non-rival. Mr. Mousey's use of the hair clippers does not prevent someone else from using them. However, Mr. Mouse still has the property right. He can determine who can use the hair clippers, so they're excludable. Because they are excludable but non-rival, we have a situation where we have a club good. Now, an example of a club good in reality would be Netflix. Your use of Netflix doesn't stop someone else using Netflix. It doesn't eat up all the movies that are there. But Netflix has the property right over selling the movies and so can determine who is able to watch them. These types of goods tend to have zero marginal cost for their provision, which is really interesting and is a concept that we hope to return to another time. But enough of that here. Now, I'm done with hair clippers for now. We also know that Mr. Mouse is a family man. He wants to buy a nice little house next to a fishing lake. He wants to wear a nice hat. He wants to have hundreds of children. And then when they all move out, he wants to spend time fishing. There's his dream. Okay. Now, the house he's buying is a private good. He buys it. It stops anyone else from being able to buy that house. But what about that fishing lake? He doesn't actually own the lake. He goes off and fishes, but other people can go there and fish as well. When he fishes, the product he gets out, well, part of it is the satisfaction of enjoying fishing, but another part is actually getting fish out. If he goes and fishes, he enjoys that. When other people go and fish, they enjoy that as well, and there's no way for them to be excluded from the idea of fishing. However, there are limited fishing stocks. Because there are limited fishing stocks available, the amount of fish you can get out is actually a rival thing. If you pull out a fish, no one else can fish up that fish anymore. So since we have something that's non-excludable but rival, we term this a common pool resource. Now, this example may sound familiar to you because it's called the tragedy of the commons. In this example, Mr. Mouse and all those who think like him will have an incentive to overfish and will unsustainably draw down fish stocks. These types of goods are termed common pool resources because we're thinking about a common pool, that fishing pool. But there are many examples of this, especially when we think about natural resource use. This example is one of a coordination failure, and it's often used to justify why we should allow excludability, why we should allow property rights. Now, when we have a product that is non-excludable and non-rival, this is termed a public good. Now, these public goods, you'll often hear people talk about public lighting and that sort of stuff. But we can also think here, what happens if we have any sort of situation where someone could consume the good and enjoy it without having to pay for it? Okay. So take the hair clippers, but Mr. Mouse doesn't own them, and the hair clippers are just sitting there doing their thing. In that case, people can come up and use their hair clippers, and that sounds great. They don't use it up for someone else. There's zero marginal cost. They're providing a service to everyone. These sound like a wonderful good to have. But just like with the street lights and the hair clippers, there's an issue. There's a large upfront cost available. So in this context, a public good isn't the same as a non-scarce good. The giant set of hair clippers, or the street light, had an upfront cost. That upfront cost means there is still scarcity. Okay, and that's a very key distinction for us to keep in mind. So now that we know about these different types of goods, we can start thinking about economic models in different markets and try to understand how goods and services are allocated and whether this seems beneficial or doesn't seem beneficial. But these are all the topics coming up as we work through this series. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.